While I was lying in a hospital bed with a tube down my throat and a machine breathing for me, my mother-in-law sat my 7-year-old daughter down at the kitchen table, looked her in the eye, and told her she was being sent back, the same way you'd return a sweater that didn't fit. Then she picked up the phone and called the adoption agency to ask what it would take to have her removed from our home. She thought I would never wake up to hear about it. She thought silence was guaranteed. She was wrong on both counts. And when I did wake up, I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of her. I made one phone call of my own, and by the time I hung up, her entire world had already started to come apart, piece by piece, and she didn't even know it yet. My name is Corinne Whitfield, and 3 years ago, my husband Holden and I adopted a little girl named Junie Kate from foster care. She came to us at 4 years old, quiet as a held breath, flinching at raised voices, keeping her shoes on inside the house because some part of her still believed she might have to leave without warning. It took 8 months before she let me braid her hair without going stiff under my hands. It took a year before she called me Mom, without looking up first to check if it was allowed. We live outside a small town in Vermont, the kind of place where the mountains close in green and quiet and everybody at the grocery store already knows whose kid is whose. Holden grew up here. His mother, Doreen Ashcroft, never left. And from the very first weekend we brought Junie Kate home, Doreen made her feelings clear in the particular way some people do, never quite saying the ugly thing out loud, but never letting you forget it was there either. "It's admirable what you're doing," she told me once at a Sunday dinner, while Junie Kate sat 3 feet away pretending not to hear. "Taking in somebody else's leftover child. Not everyone could do it. Leftover child." I remember setting my fork down very carefully so I wouldn't throw it. Doreen had money. Old family land, a trust her late husband left behind, and a habit of using both like leverage. She paid for Junie Kate's school clothes and then mentioned the receipt at dinner. She bought the girl a bicycle for her birthday and then told her, in front of everyone, that she hoped Junie Kate would grow into a family that appreciated nice things, like the bike came with a warning label. Holden called it generosity. I called it a leash with a bow tied on it. There was a specific afternoon, maybe 8 months after Junie Kate came to us, that I've never been able to shake. We were at Doreen's house for a birthday party for one of Holden's cousins, and one of the other women at the party, someone I barely knew, asked Junie Kate a perfectly innocent question about where she used to live before coming here. Junie Kate went quiet the way she used to go quiet, and before I could step in and redirect the conversation, Doreen answered for her. "She doesn't really remember much before us," Doreen said, patting Junie Kate's head like she was patting a dog. "Her situation before wasn't exactly stable. We're just grateful she landed somewhere decent." I watched my daughter's face when Doreen said, "her situation," like Junie Kate's entire life before the age of 4 was a weather event, something that happened to her rather than something she survived. I pulled Doreen aside later that day and asked her, as evenly as I could manage, to please not talk about Junie Kate's history like that in front of her, or in front of anyone. Doreen looked at me with genuine confusion, like I'd asked her not to breathe. "I'm just being honest," she said. "Children need to understand where they came from so they can appreciate where they ended up." That was Doreen's worldview in one sentence. Appreciation, gratitude, the constant quiet expectation that Junie Kate owed something for having been let into this family, that love here came with an invoice attached even if nobody ever said the dollar amount out loud. Holden always smoothed it over when I brought it up at home. "That's just how she talks," he'd say. "She doesn't mean it like that." I stopped believing that a long time before the accident happened. I just hadn't decided yet what I was going to do about it. Then, in March, everything changed in the space of about 4 seconds. I was driving home from a late shift at the clinic where I work as a physical therapist, taking the long way because the evening was clear and I wanted the extra 10 minutes of quiet before walking into a house full of homework and dinner and bedtime negotiations. A truck ran a red light on Route 4, going close to 50, and the last thing I remember is the sensation of the wheel jerking sideways under my hands, the world tilting, and then nothing at all. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the ambulance, or the emergency room, or the first surgery. I remember waking up 11 days later in a hospital room in Burlington, my ribs wrapped so tight I could barely take a full breath, a headache like a fist behind my eyes, tubes taped to the back of my hand, and Holden's face hovering above me, gray with exhaustion and something else I couldn't name yet. He cried when I opened my eyes. He held my hand and told me Junie Kate had been asking for me every single day. He did not tell me what his mother had done with those 11 days, and he kept not telling me for 3 more weeks after I came home. I found out what that something else on his face actually meant 3 days after I came home from the hospital, and once I knew, I understood exactly why he hadn't been able to look at me straight on. Junie Kate wouldn't look at me. She'd sit at the far end of the couch, knees pulled to her chest, and when I reached for her she'd flinch, that old flinch, the one I thought we'd buried a year ago. I asked Holden what happened while I was in the coma. He said everything was fine, that his mother had helped out, that Junie Kate was just adjusting to me being home and moving slower than usual. I didn't believe him. Mothers know the difference between a child who's adjusting and a child who's bracing. It was Junie Kate herself who told me, 3 nights later, in the dark, in a voice so small I had to lean in to catch it. "Grandma Doreen said you might not wake up," she whispered. "She said if you didn't, I'd have to go back. She said she already called the lady. The one from before. She said sometimes returns happen and it's nobody's fault, it's just how it works out." I lay very still and made myself breathe evenly so my daughter wouldn't feel my heartbeat change. "She said what, baby?" "She said I was like a gift that got sent to the wrong house. That sometimes you have to send it back so it can go to the right one." Junie Kate's voice cracked on the last word. "She said I shouldn't tell you because it would make you sad, and you were already sick enough. I have worked with trauma patients for 11 years. I know what dissociation looks like, what shutdown looks like, what a child does with her hands when she's trying not to feel something too big for her body. I watched my daughter do all 3 of those things in the dark of her bedroom, describing the day her grandmother tried to give her away like a piece of furniture nobody wanted anymore, while I was 2 floors down in intensive care, unable to stop it, unable to even know it was happening. "Am I in trouble for telling you?" she whispered after a long silence, and something in my chest cracked clean in half. "No, baby. Never. You did exactly the right thing. Grandma said it would make you sad." "It does make me sad," I told her, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "But not because you told me. It makes me sad that anybody ever said those words to you at all. That was never true, Junie Kate. Do you hear me? You are not a gift that got sent to the wrong house. You are my daughter. That's it. That's the whole sentence." She didn't say anything back. She just curled her small hand into mine under the blanket and held on until her breathing evened out into sleep, and I lay awake for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling, doing the quiet arithmetic of exactly how much damage had been done to a 7-year-old sense of safety in the 11 days I wasn't conscious to prevent it. The next morning, I asked Holden directly. This time he didn't deflect. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, wouldn't meet my eyes at first, and told me the truth in pieces, the way people do when they've been sitting on something too heavy to hold alone anymore. He told me he'd found out about most of it only after the fact, that his mother had more or less run the household during the worst of the crisis while he split his time between the hospital and trying to keep Junie Kate fed and in school, and that by the time he pieced together what she'd actually done, he didn't know how to tell me without it sounding like he'd let it happen. Maybe, in a way I understood but didn't excuse, he had. While I was unconscious, Doreen had, in fact, called the regional adoption agency that had originally placed Junie Kate with us. She told them, falsely, that with me in critical condition and Holden overwhelmed, the family was reconsidering whether they could provide a stable home, and she wanted to know the process for a voluntary disruption. That's the clinical term for giving a child back. A disruption. Like snapping a rubber band. The agency, to their enormous credit, had refused to proceed with anyone but the legal guardians and flagged the call internally. But Doreen didn't stop there. She'd also gone through Holden's desk while he was living at the hospital day and night and found an old durable power of attorney Holden had signed years earlier for an unrelated situation and simply forgotten to revoke. It named her as an authorized party on one specific joint account, a formality nobody had thought to close out. Using that outdated document and a great deal of practiced confidence, she walked into the bank and told the teller she was handling the family's affairs, while her son and daughter-in-law were dealing with a medical crisis. The transfer went through that day. It shouldn't have, the bank later acknowledged, once my attorney got involved, that the paperwork never should have cleared review, but it did, and $11,000 moved out of our joint savings account and into one Doreen controlled before anyone thought to ask a second question. She told Holden, when he finally noticed and asked, that she was protecting the family's assets in case I didn't recover, and that she'd return it when things settled. She told our 7-year-old daughter she might be sent away like defective merchandise, all while quietly moving money out of the family she claimed to be protecting. I sat at my own kitchen table, 3 weeks out of a coma, and understood that the woman who called my daughter a leftover child had also been robbing us blind while I couldn't defend either one of us. Doreen came by that Sunday like nothing had happened. She brought a casserole. She asked how my recovery was coming along, patted my hand, told me God was good, and asked if Junie Kate wanted to spend the following weekend at her house, like always. I watched my daughter's shoulders climb up toward her ears. "No," I said. "She won't be doing that." Doreen's smile thinned but didn't drop. "Corinne, honey, you've been through a trauma. It's normal to be a little protective right now. But the child needs consistency." "The child," I said, "needs to not be told by her grandmother that she's being returned like a defective gift while her mother is in a coma." For one full second, Doreen's face went perfectly still. Then she recovered, smooth as ever. "I don't know what that little girl told you, but children exaggerate." I said something about how sometimes placements don't work out. It was a general conversation, not a threat. "You called an agency, Doreen. That's not general. That's an action." "I was being responsible in case something happened to you," she said, voice climbing. "Somebody had to think about what would happen to this family if you didn't wake up. Holden was falling apart. I was the only one keeping things together." "You were keeping $11,000 together," I said quietly, "in an account with your name on it." That landed. I watched it land. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, and what came out was not an apology. It was a threat dressed up as concern. "I would think very carefully, Corinne, about making accusations while you're still recovering. People might start to wonder if the accident affected your judgment. Nobody would blame Holden for wanting to protect his mother's reputation, especially with an outsider child in the picture." She let that phrase sit there between us, ugly and deliberate. "You want to be careful about who you make an enemy of in a town this small." She wanted my silence. She'd wanted it from the very beginning. That's why she told a 7-year-old not to tell me. That's why she moved money while I couldn't watch the accounts. That's why she was standing in my kitchen now, smiling over a casserole, reminding me how small this town was and how much people talked. I smiled back at her. "I want you to understand that smile, because it wasn't defeat. It was the first calm I'd felt in 3 weeks. You're right," I told her. "It is a small town. Small towns love a story." I don't think she understood, in that moment, what I meant. I don't think she understood until much later that the story wasn't a threat. It was a promise. After she left that day, I sat with Junie Kate on the porch steps for a long time, not saying much, just letting her lean her weight against my side while she picked at the peeling paint on the railing. She looked up at one point and asked me, in the plain, direct way children ask the questions adults spend years avoiding, whether Grandma Doreen could actually send her back if she wanted to. "No," I said. "She was never able to. She wanted you to believe she could, because that made her feel powerful. But that was never true, and it's never going to be true. You are not going anywhere. Promise." "I promise. And I don't make promises I can't keep." I meant every word of it, but I also knew a promise wasn't enough on its own. Doreen had already shown, in the space of 11 unconscious days, exactly what she was capable of doing when she thought nobody was watching closely enough to stop her. A promise protects a feeling. It doesn't protect a legal status, or a bank account, or a 7-year-old's place in a family. Somewhere between that porch step and bedtime that night, I stopped thinking about how to make Doreen feel sorry and started thinking, very specifically, about how to make her powerless to ever try this again. That night, once Junie Kate was asleep with the hallway light on the way she liked it, I sat down with a legal pad and wrote out everything in order: dates, the exact wording Junie Kate had repeated back to me, the $11,000, the timeline of the power of attorney, all of it. Then I made the one call I'd been holding on to since the moment my daughter whispered, "Returns happen in the dark." I'm not going to tell you yet who I called. I will tell you that it was not the police, and it was not a shouting match, and it was not a scene at Sunday dinner. It was quieter than that, and it was far, far more effective than anything I could have screamed at Doreen Ashcroft across a casserole dish. Over the following 2 weeks, 3 things happened, almost in sequence, like dominoes I'd set up in the dark without her noticing. The adoption agency, having already flagged Doreen's original call as irregular, was contacted again, this time by me, with documentation, formally requesting that Doreen Ashcroft be listed as a restricted contact with no authority to inquire about Junie Kate's placement status, ever, under any circumstance. That request was granted within days. The financial institution holding the account where Doreen moved our money received a formal notice, prepared with the help of the attorney I'd called that first night, laying out exactly why the transfer should never have been processed and demanding the funds be returned or the matter would proceed to a formal claim. Banks do not enjoy formal claims. The money was back in our account inside of 9 days, along with a very carefully worded letter from Doreen's own lawyer, urging her to resolve the matter amicably, which is legal language for get out in front of this before it gets worse for you. And the third domino was the one Doreen never saw coming at all, because she'd spent so many years assuming that in a small town, appearances were the only currency that mattered, that if she smiled at church and brought casseroles and said, "Bless her heart," in the right tone, nobody would ever look past the surface. My attorney submitted the full documentation directly to the regional office that oversaw the adoption agency, along with copies to the library board and the hospital auxiliary committee, since Doreen served on both and both organizations required members to disclose any open findings involving child welfare. The library board opened a formal ethics review within the week. The hospital auxiliary did the same 2 days later. Neither board announced anything publicly. They simply started asking Doreen, in writing, to respond to the documentation in front of them. I didn't ask for that connection to be used against her. I didn't have to ask. Institutions have paper trails, and paper trails don't care how good your casserole is. It came apart quietly, first, the way these things usually do. The hospital auxiliary sent Doreen a letter requesting she appear before the board to respond to the documentation, and rather than face that meeting, she submitted her resignation in writing 3 days beforehand, citing personal reasons. The library board followed almost the same script 2 weeks later, a request to respond, a resignation letter instead of an answer. No public announcement, no vote, no scene. Just Doreen quietly disappearing from 2 letterheads she'd spent 15 years making sure her name stayed on. But small towns don't need a public announcement to know something happened. By the time the 4th of July gathering came around, the one Doreen hosted every single year on the lawn behind her house, the one where half the town showed up because she made sure half the town was always invited, word had already moved through the church and the school pickup line and the grocery store the way word does in a place like ours. People didn't know every detail. They only knew that 2 respected organizations had opened ethics reviews within weeks of each other, and that Doreen had resigned from both before either one finished. Nobody said the words adoption agency or bank transfer out loud. They didn't have to. I watched people who had known Doreen for 20 years greet her a little more carefully than usual that day, a little more formally, the warmth gone thin around the edges. I watched the pastor's wife stay only long enough to be polite before finding a reason to leave early. I watched the hospital auxiliary chairwoman, standing near the dessert table, Exchange maybe 4 sentences with Doreen the entire afternoon, when in past years the two of them had been inseparable. Doreen kept up the performance, the garden small talk, the tray of deviled eggs, the bright hostess voice, but I watched her notice, over the course of that afternoon, exactly how much quieter her own party had gotten. I stood near the drinks table with Junie Kate's hand in mine, and I said nothing at all. I didn't need to. Doreen had built her whole reputation on being the woman who held this town together, the one who knew everyone's business and made sure everyone knew she was the one holding the thread. She had never once imagined what would happen if the thread got pulled by someone she'd underestimated, someone still healing, still limping slightly from a car accident, someone she assumed would stay quiet out of exhaustion or fear of a small town's opinion. Holden, to his credit, finally stopped smoothing things over. He told his mother, in a conversation I wasn't in the room for but heard about afterward, that she would have supervised contact with Junie Kate going forward, if any contact at all, and that the next time she used the words "sent back" about his daughter, in any context, she would not be welcome in our home again, full stop. Doreen apparently tried for a while to appeal to him privately, to remind him of everything she'd sacrificed raising him alone after his father passed, to suggest that I was the one poisoning the family against her. Holden told her, calmly and for the last time, that nobody had poisoned anything. She had done this to herself, one phone call and one bank transfer under false pretenses at a time, while his wife lay unconscious in a hospital bed unable to stop her. The money stayed returned. The restricted contact stayed on file with the agency. And Junie Kate, slowly, over the following months, stopped keeping her shoes on inside the house. She started leaving them by the door again, the way a child does when she trusts, somewhere in her bones, that she's not going anywhere. Doreen still lives in town. She still goes to church. But the casseroles stopped coming, and so did the invitations to the things that used to matter to her, the committees, the boards, the rooms where she used to be the one who decided who belonged and who got sent back. She built her whole identity on being indispensable to this town, and it turned out the town was perfectly capable of managing without her the moment they saw what she was capable of doing to a 7-year-old girl who never got the chance to defend herself. I never raised my voice at her. I never needed to. I made one phone call, and I let the truth do what threats and casseroles never could. Junie Kate is 10 now. She still keeps a nightlight on in the hallway, and some nights she still needs to be told out loud that she isn't going anywhere. But she believes it now, most days, all the way down. Every evening when she leaves her shoes by the front door, I'm reminded that home isn't where a child is placed. It's where they finally stop wondering if they'll have to leave. If someone in your life has ever tried to make you choose between silence and the people you love, what would it have taken for you to make the call instead? If this story moved you, hit subscribe to Sophie Revenge, because we post a brand new story just like this one every single day.